So as I was talking to Lauren about this concept of privately owned public space, which is exactly what it sounds like. It seems like a little bit of something that doesn't typically go together, right? Privately owned public space, but is exactly what it says. And before I jump into that, I was exactly what it means. I was thinking about this concept of space, and living in New York and in the East Village specifically. In Alphabet City, I'm pretty lucky to be surrounded by so many different gardens, and it's something that I really appreciate and treasure about my neighborhood. But what's one thing that everyone who lives in New York can pretty much agree that there's not enough of, whether you're a resident, a real estate developer, it's space. You know, it's the one thing that you can't ever get enough of, but there's really, until Lola or Low Line gets going, it's hard to artificially create more space in New York City. And I realized this is a really, really important topic. And to give you the background on what this exactly means, basically what happened around the 1960s, there was construction in Manhattan was booming. And it was also the way that buildings were being built was changing pretty dramatically. And what was happening was, before then, you might realize that a lot of the very typical Gotham, New York City buildings have a type of architecture called wedding cake style. So they would take up, basically, to be able to build as high as they could, using the technology they had, they would build a very, very big base using almost the entire city block. And they would build as high as they could, but after a certain point, they had to kind of get more narrower and narrower and narrower. And you see that in a lot of the older buildings. And what happened when a lot of buildings started doing that is you lose a lot of light in the city, and it damages the air quality, and it damages just the general public experience of the city, because it's a very pedestrian city. You want to walk around and enjoy it, and it makes it very difficult to do that. But with architectural advances, eventually what happened was, went from the layer cake style to what you see on the right, and this is the more typical modern day style where they would be able to build a much narrower space, and they could just build straight up, and then they would have this kind of courtyard experience. But at the time, they were privately owned spaces, and they were not open to the public. So there was an incentive that was created for a lot of these builders to basically open those spaces up and make them publicly available. And if they did that, they would get all kinds of incredibly lucrative incentives that would allow them to have more density of their buildings, which in this case in architecture basically means that they could just keep going higher. In a lot of their instances, they would max out at maybe 15, 30, 40, 50 floors, and they'd essentially be able to build up higher. And so that was a really sweet deal for a lot of those guys. So at that time, they decided, okay, let's open it up. And so they would section off different parts of their buildings, and they agreed to make them publicly available space, even though they're privately owned. It means anyone can go in there at any time. It doesn't matter if it's inside of a lobby of a building, outside in a beautiful landscaped area. Anyone could come in, whether they work in that building, live in that building, they can come in and make use of that space. But over years, as things happen, buildings change hands, time goes by, a lot of those spaces that were intended to be for public use begin to take a lot of different forms. So here's one that has been manicured really, really beautifully. This photo was taken on a Sunday in the summer. It's a huge open grass area. I saw the larger photo of it the other day, and there was literally 4 people in this space. And it's noontime. You would think anywhere else in New York where they're so manicured, so beautiful, and open to the public, there would be a lot of people out there enjoying the space. But the challenge with many of these spaces is that no one actually knows about them. No one knows that they're there. There's no signage. There's no database that's readily available. There's not even an app, which I'll get to in a moment, which would make it very easy to be like, okay, I'm on 50th and 3rd Avenue. Where's the nearest publicly available space to me? Because there's pretty much every single neighborhood has a good handful of them. And so they range from this beautiful space to this one, which is, you've got a farmer's market, and right around the corner, there's a place with tables and chairs and benches, the perfect place to go and enjoy an afternoon. But again, no one really knows about those spaces. To an oasis in the middle with trees and plants and place to sit and relax. And then we have the other side, totally underutilized. Pretty much, these spaces are actually theoretically in a violation because one of the requirements is to have a place that you can actually sit in a public, and once you've made this agreement that you would have a publicly owned space, is that you actually create a place that you can sit. And these are ones that, and in a lot of cases that the building owners may just not, they may not be totally aware of it. They may not, it's obviously not at the forefront of their mind. No one's sitting there reminding them to encourage that. It's not something that's heavily enforced at the moment. And some are just straight up not inviting. So it's hard to sit on this ledge or enjoy that space. As beautiful it looks, you're not going to like sit and relax in that area. It's clearly not very welcoming. And others are just have been transitioned into driveways, parkways. This was supposed to be another publicly available space, and it was just transitioned to something that better suits the building's immediate needs rather than what they were supposed to do, which is make it a space that is available to the public. To others that are just, you would never find this space if you weren't in the building, and it's a very tough space to take use of unless you want to sit on the floor and make a little indoor picnic. And some have turned into like a toxic waste holding space or something. And I guess the major point here, and this is another interesting point, where it's an outdoor space, highly coveted space in New York City on the west side in the 20s, I believe, and just totally underutilized. And I think that one of the major things to keep in mind is that they could be transitioned into something way more beautiful. And looking forward, there's three things that we could all probably take into consideration. The first one is incentivizing care. As more people learn about this and try and find those spaces and use them, obviously it will put pressure on those buildings to actually take into consideration to upkeep them and make them more available. But how do you do that? And I think that hopefully by the next time that we all go and look for a publicly available space, I know that Lauren is working on an app that will literally allow you to open it up, and at any point wherever you are, you can geolocate your position, and it would drop pins on all the publicly available spaces nearest to you. So you could go and easily find them. Or you could take photos or mark them as a space that needs attention. And that would bring in the self-government component. So hopefully next time we go check them out, they will be available. That's it. Check out a local publicly available space near you, and thank you very much.